The History of Poland, Episode 11, The Ascent of Bolesław II. Hello and welcome back. Last time, we left off with Casimir the Restorer passing away after he struggled valiantly for many years to reunite the Polish realm. He had reconquered territory, won alliances with the Empire and the Kievan Rus, had defied the wishes of the Bohemian powers that be, and had won over his subjects. As we mentioned, his reign wasn't without issue, but overall, it was pretty good, all things being considered. In many ways, it was better than some of the reigns that came before, as he had to deal with the pagan reaction and a complete breakdown of civil society, which he did with a surprising degree of agility and success. But all good things come to an end, and so it is with Casimir. Upon his passing, Casimir had 3 sons. Now, unlike the previous Piast monarchs, we aren't going to only get to know one of the sons and then ignore the rest like there's some nobodies on the political scene. In fact, we're about to enter into a period of fairly confusing dynastic succession, so buckle up. There are 2 sons of Casimir that we need to be familiar with. The first is a name we should all be familiar with already, Bolesław. He is historically known as Bolesław II the Generous on account of generously sprinkling the Polish countryside with new churches and other religious buildings. The second son is a less familiar name to us, Władysław Herman. For today's episode, we'll primarily stick with Bolesław II, but know that in a future episode, we'll be learning some more about his brother. Anyway, back to the story. Casimir had passed away and is set to divide up his territory between his sons. Bolesław got the choice portions, while his brother Władysław and another brother got the rest, split between them. The third brother, whose name I won't really bother you with, died a few years into his inheritance, and the land was then ceded over to Bolesław. This doesn't seem to have been a huge event in Bolesław's reign, but it's worth mentioning anyway. He's a big landowner. So, we've got Bolesław ruling as the Duke of Poland, with his younger brother compliantly ruling over a section of the territory as a vassal of Bolesław's. Now, to give you a little bit of backstory on what's been happening with my research, let's just say that finding a historically reliable account of the pagan uprising and the accompanying chaos was not a walk in the park. There's just so little verifiable detail, largely as a result of, well, the nation being in complete revolt. This time is different though. With Bolesław II now in command, there are chroniclers again. There are foreign invasions on the part of the Polish forces which get documented in multiple places. There are illuminated chronicles about things, coinage, archaeology, you name it. In other words, there's a lot of detail. Not wanting to miss an opportunity, I wanted to really dive in on what's happening during Bolesław's reign. So this isn't going to be one episode about him. It's going to be at least 3 from what I can tell. And if there was a bingo card for this podcast, maybe there is. Note to self, make a bingo card for the podcast. We'd hit all the boxes. Bohemia, Pomerania, Hungary, the Empire, the Pope, the Kievan Rus, Saxon nobles, dynastic marriages, depositions, assassinations, martyrs, and myths and legends. In other words, there's a lot going on during the 20-odd year reign of Bolesław II. But let's start with something simple. Hungary. As we've covered in the past few episodes, Hungary has an on-again, off-again relationship with Poland. Sometimes they're close buddies and they team up against the Empire. Other times they're fierce rivals duking it out over the borderlands. Still other times they ignore each other completely and focus on their own affairs. It's too much to get into for this series, but there are quite a few parallels between the early development of Poland and the early development of Hungary. Not to say that they are the same, since their destinies wildly diverge over the course of history, and even now they have different relationships with Germany, Bohemia, the papacy, and Russia. But still, there are threads of common cause between them. One of the common threads between them is that their ruling families don't seem to have firm dynastic handoffs nailed down yet. In the case of Poland, we have the mess of the Piast family, while in Hungary we have the Arpad dynasty. Now, the last monarch we named from Hungary was King Peter, who followed after King Stephen. Stephen was in many ways the founder of the monarchy in that he was the first king of Hungary. They had nobles and grand princes before that, but he really turned Hungary into a Christianized kingdom, or at least started it down that path. Of course, as with any monarchy at this time, we'd expect the sons of Stephen to eventually take the throne upon his death. Sadly for Stephen, this proved impossible. While he did have 2 sons, they both died before they could take the throne after him. So, Stephen was left with a decision. Who was he going to empower and endorse for the throne after he died? There were 2 main options. The first, as we know, was Peter the Venetian, who was his nephew via his sister. Surprisingly though, while we already know he became king, he didn't actually have the strongest claim for the throne. That honor would have gone to his cousin, whose name I won't bother you with, but there's one thing to know about this cousin. Stephen suspected that he wasn't a faithful Christian, and that after Stephen died, he would turn the nation back towards paganism. So, instead of choosing his cousin, he had him blinded and chose Peter. Stephen then passed away, and Peter assumed the throne. Now, what of this cousin? Why do I spend so much time talking about him? Because while he was blinded and died without posing a real threat to Peter's monarchy, he had 3 sons who very much remembered what happened to their dear old dad, and who it was that benefited from his untimely demise. Not wanting to be on the wrong side of someone who was now king, the 3 sons fled from Hungary and went to Bohemia. 2 of these sons are worth naming, Bela and Andrew. According to the sources we have, it appears that they didn't have a great time in Bohemia and decided to head on over to Poland, which at this time was still under the rule of Mieszko II. There's a bit of a tale about what Bela did in Poland to impress Mieszko II, involving some sort of duel that may or may not have happened, but whatever it was, something impressed Mieszko to the point where he gave his daughter Richeza to the wife of Bela. The 2 were married, and Bela was now related to the Piast line. Time went on, and we lose track of the exact whereabouts of Bela and his family. Bela appears to have either stayed in Poland during the pagan reaction, or to have traveled with Casimir as he was going about the Eastern European countryside, while his brother Andrew went to the Kievan Rus and made that his base of operations, seemingly waiting for the opportunity to return to Hungary. They can't go back while Peter is in charge, but also they can't seem to find a way to oust... Wait, I'm sorry, what's that? Oh, there's a pagan reaction in Hungary that forces Peter from power? Well, who would have guessed? Andrew finds out about this, and as the eldest of his brothers, decides to claim the throne. This happens in 1046, and seeing as he didn't have an heir, he invited his younger brother Bela to the nation to help take part in ruling Hungary. This was a time of relative prosperity for Bela, at least compared to his earlier years on the run in Poland and Bohemia. He was raised to the status of a duke, second only to his brother the king. The 2 of them ran the nation, devised ways of fighting back the invading Germans who were probing the territory looking for conquest, and generally getting along. Andrew would eventually die, and Bela would take his place. What a great plan. It was all going so smoothly until Andrew had a son, named Solomon, who would obviously follow in his father's footsteps. What king isn't going to make their son king after them? Now, the question became, what to do with Bela? He had been given a very serious taste of true power, reportedly even minting coins in his own name and having complete discretion over his section of Hungary. But he obviously needed to go away to make room for Solomon. Not wanting to kill his brother, but also wanting the best for his son, Andrew devised a trap. As he lay sick and dying, he would invite Bela to come to him. He would then give him a choice: crown or sword. If Bela chose the sword, Andrew would let him go free, knowing that Bela was content with military power and his position as a duke. If he chose the crown, Andrew would have him imprisoned and killed, since Bela would clearly not settle for anything other than total power. Bela, fortunately for him, had friends in his brother's employ and found out about the scheme. Now, it's not actually clear what Bela chose. He may have chosen the sword to avoid immediate murder, or he may have chosen the crown and fled. Either way, we know that Bela did the sensible thing and ran for Poland, where he at least had some friends and was seemingly outside of the reach of Andrew. After all, if your brother was just considering murdering you, you don't stick around to find out if he's really going to do it. This brings us up to where we are with Bolesław. Andrew runs Hungary. He wants his son Solomon to be king after him, and Bela, who clearly wants to be king instead of his child, is in Poland with Bolesław. While he was there, now irreconcilably at odds with his brother, Bela convinced Bolesław to back his bid for the throne. After all, if you could install a ruler that is to your benefit, wouldn't you? So in 1060, Bolesław decides he has nothing better to do and sets off with an army of Polish soldiers with Bela at his side and invades Hungary. We don't really have many details about this military campaign, but we know the end result. Andrew lost and died shortly thereafter. Solomon was secreted away by some German allies, and Bela took the throne. Yay, Bela! Enjoy yourself. You earned it. Now, while Bela was king, he continued his alliance with Bolesław and the Polish. This alliance was quite important, as both of them had a common enemy: the Holy Roman Empire. Yes, Poland was back on bad terms with the Empire, which we'll get into our next episode, but for now let's just say that Poland was not at all fond of the Emperor, and that Bolesław was doing all he could to give Poland the upper hand in its conflict with imperial forces. At this point in our story, Bolesław was fighting against the German forces primarily because those same German forces wanted 2 things. First, they wanted to put Solomon on the throne, and second, they wanted to take a good chunk of Hungary and put it under the dominion of the German Emperor. Along the way, if they made their fortune, they wouldn't have complained. None of this would be good news for Bela, which meant that none of it would be good news for Bolesław. So, being the pragmatist that he seems to have been, Bolesław fought alongside the Hungarians and successfully held off the German army. So successfully, in fact, that when Bolesław returned to Poland, he decided he'd really stick it to the empire and stop paying tribute to Bohemia over the disputed province of Silesia. This ticked off the Bohemians mighty fine, and the armies of Poland and Bohemia were once more at each other's throats, figuratively and literally. It was your typical Polish-Bohemian border skirmish, without a clear change in circumstances between the two. Naturally, you're probably wondering what a typical Bohemian-Polish border skirmish looks like. Well, fortunately, we have a somewhat detailed picture of it, courtesy of Gallus Anonymous. Gallus recounts to us as follows, quote, "It happened that the Duke of Bohemia entered Poland with his warriors in full strength. After crossing the thick forest, he came into a plain, which was quite suitable for battle, and camped there. When Bolesław heard the news, he lost no time in hastening to meet the foe. He swiftly circled around the enemy, seized the road they had come by, and cut them off. The best part of the day was past, and the hasty march had left his men exhausted, so he gave the Czechs to understand, through messengers, that he would not come to fight them the next day, and entreated them earnestly to remain there and not to tire him further. For before, he said, you would come out of the forest like wolves, and hungry after capturing your prey, you would make your way into the forest hiding places with impunity while the shepherd was absent. But now the hunter is here, with his hunting spears, and the hounds are set loose upon your trail, and it will not be by flight or by trickery, but by courage that you will succeed in avoiding the nets that have been stretched out for you." But the Duke of the Czechs, with practiced cunning, sent Bolesław back the following answer. It was not fitting that so great a king should go out of his way to meet with a lesser one, but on the next day, if he was the son of Casimir, he should be in the same place, ready to await the Czechs at his service. Bolesław, wishing to show that he was Casimir's son, fulfilled the deceitful request of the Czechs by remaining there. But by the middle of the next day, word was brought by scouts to the Polish camp that the Czechs had slipped away during the previous night, rather than join battle. Bolesław felt bitter about having been tricked, but the very same hour set off in hot pursuit of the Czechs as they fled through Moravia. Though many were seized and cut down, Bolesław turned back, still angry at himself that they had succeeded in escaping in this way." End quote. This isn't the end of the battle, though, since this was quite indecisive. It appears that there continued to be a number of skirmishes, though no pitched battles that ended things conclusively one way or the other. Finally, though, Bolesław II reached an agreement with the Duke of Bohemia, Władysław, by having him marry Bolesław's sister. The marriage didn't and couldn't bring permanent peace between the two states, but it did provide Bolesław with a period of neutrality. This not only took Bohemia out of his conflict with the empire, but it also allowed him the freedom to focus on other areas of his dominions. Specifically, he got involved with the Kievan Rus. You see, Bolesław's aunt, Gertruda, was married to a man named Izyaslav, who was coincidentally the Grand Prince and ruler of Kiev. Regrettably, Izyaslav didn't appear to be overwhelmingly popular. In fact, due to an ongoing conflict with his brothers, which is outside of the scope of this podcast, since really, we can't just keep going into the internal politics of every Eastern European country in one episode, he was deposed by the people he was supposed to be ruling in favor of his brother, who had been imprisoned. Through a few different sources, we hear a bit about Izyaslav's attempt to regain power, which happens to a large extent because Bolesław agrees to help out his aunt and her husband by heading over to Kiev himself with an army of Polish soldiers. As it's recounted to us in the primary chronicle, just to give some context, I'm removing the names of Izyaslav's brothers to avoid overly confusing the story, but they do have names, they just aren't important to the context of the events. Anyway, the primary chronicle says, quote, "Reinforced by Bolesław, Izyaslav marched to attack his brother, who went forth to meet them and arrived at Belgorod. But during the night his brother hid himself from the men of Kiev and fled from Belgorod to Polotsk. When the men of Kiev saw on the morrow that their prince had fled, they returned to Kiev, and after calling an assembly, they sent messages to the two brothers saying, 'We did wrong in expelling our prince, and now he leads the Poles against us. Return to your father's city. If you refuse to return, then we have no alternative but to burn our city and depart to Greece.' His brothers replied, 'We shall communicate with our brother. If he marches upon you with the Poles to destroy you, we shall fight against him, and not allow him to destroy our father's city. If his intentions are peaceful, then he shall approach with a small troop.' Then the people of Kiev were pacified. His brothers then sent messengers to Izyaslav, announcing that they had fled, and requesting him accordingly not to lead the Poles and attack upon Kiev, because no one was really opposing him. They also let it be understood that if he intended to nurse his wrath and destroy the city, they would be properly concerned for the ancestral capital. When Izyaslav received these tidings, he left the Poles and came forward, accompanied only by Bolesław, himself and a small Polish escort. He sent his son ahead of him into Kiev, and upon the latter's arrival, he slew those who had freed his brother to the number of 70, blinded others, and executed without any investigation others who were entirely innocent. When Izyaslav arrived at the city, the inhabitants went forth to welcome him, and the men of Kiev welcomed him as their prince. Izyaslav thus resumed his throne on May 2nd. He then scattered the Poles to forage, and then had them secretly killed. Bolesław then returned to his native country." End quote. In case you missed that, even though Izyaslav had managed to reclaim power in Kiev courtesy of the Poles, it's reported in this chronicle that he secretly had them killed as they were out foraging for supplies. There's no indications as to why he did that, but my guess is that he saw what happened when Bolesław I had entered Kiev. For those of you who don't remember, he entered the city and effectively began to rule in his own right, since he had the only army. It may have been that Izyaslav was trying to avoid being subjected by the second Bolesław and secretly killed his followers to leave him without a power base. Anyway, Izyaslav eventually gets his reward for this treachery. He's later deposed, and according to the primary chronicle, he again fled to Poland. This time, though, the primary chronicle tells us, quote, "Now Izyaslav took considerable treasure with him on his flight into Poland with the intention of recruiting supporters there, but the Poles robbed him of all his property and expelled him from their boundaries." End quote. Now, I've been all over the place in this week's episode, but there's a reason. You may have the impression that Bolesław was amazing and that he was really in charge of the area with strong influence in Kiev, Hungary, and Bohemia. While that's partially true, the fact is that while Bolesław could muster forces to influence events, his invasions didn't really have a lasting impact. In Hungary, Bela died a few years into his reign, and Bolesław was unable to keep his son Géza on the throne, allowing the emperor to put Solomon back on the throne. Domestically, in Poland, the province of Western Pomerania again rebelled and was lost by Bolesław. In Bohemia, relations broke down again, and Poland and Bohemia were again at odds, siding with the empire, and Poland deciding not to side with the empire. Which brings me to the final point of this episode: the empire. We've largely avoided talking about Bolesław II's relationship with the emperor, but that's because there's so much to talk about that it deserves its own episode. In fact, in our next episode, we're not only going to talk empire, we're also going to talk papacy, medieval law, and a whole bunch of other interesting subjects that all influence and are influenced by Bolesław's court. Before I go, though, I just wanted to follow up on last week's suggestion that I start a Patreon page to have people support the show. Well, the response was pretty positive, and there's now a page. Once I reach a certain goal, I'm going to start work on the mini-series about the origins of the Holy Roman Empire, and then continue with a few series about the Mongol invasion of Europe, and then plenty others. And you know what? I don't even really have to reach the goal because I've started outlining the episodes already, but if you donate and help me along towards the goal, I will be more motivated to do it sooner. So, if you'd like to support the show, it's surprisingly easy. Go to patreon.com/History of Poland podcast. I'll put a link in the show notes. Again, patreon.com/History of Poland podcast. It takes about 2 minutes to get set up to donate. You choose the amount, you choose how frequently, and you get some rewards, including, of course, exclusive access to the forthcoming miniseries on the Holy Roman Empire. I'd love it if you'd support the show. It helps cover the cost of hosting the show and paying for all the books required to create these episodes. It also helps it so that I can focus more on this and release episodes more regularly. Every dollar counts. Anyway, thank you for your continued support. Thank you to those of you who have already donated, and I will see you next time.